We should start by being sober about the unprecedented social emergency our country faces. According to a report from the Food Foundation just published, 2 million of our fellow citizens went without food for a whole day in the past month because they could not afford to eat. 7 million families had to skip a meal, and that was true of nearly half of those on universal credit. This is not just about families out of work, but families in work too. This is a social emergency, and it is also a looming economic threat, depriving our economy of the spending power it needs. And the question at the heart of this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is whether this gracious speech, this government, and yes, this Chancellor, is up to the challenge this emergency represents. Now, the Chancellor wants us to believe that his measures in response are the best we can do, but they are not by a long shot. The cost of living crisis is driven most of all by what is happening to energy bills. Let's look at the 3 chances he's had in the last 7 months to act on energy bills. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was last August, 9 months ago, that the first energy price rise was announced, a £139 increase in the price cap. So way back then, he knew what was happening. And then in October, he delivered his budget. Wholesale energy prices were rocketing. The warning signals were flashing, but the Chancellor did nothing. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe you should go back and reread that budget speech, because I think it would make even him wince. It is a model of complacency. He drunk his own Kool-Aid. This is what he told the country back then, and I quote, "Wages are rising, growth up, a government ready and willing to act on inflation. The plan is working." Where are we now, Madam Deputy Speaker? On wages, the Office for Budget Responsibility is this year forecasting the biggest fall in living standards in 45 years. Growth turned negative in March, with the Bank of England suggesting the economy is going to shrink through the winter. And on inflation, we are now set for the highest level of inflation for 40 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, the plan isn't working, it is failing. And he didn't, I'll make some more progress, but I will give way. And he didn't act when he could have done. In February, another chance he had, as the largest energy price rise in our history, 52%, was announced. He could have responded, commensurate with the crisis. But what was, he says he did, well, let's look at it. What was his grand offer to the country? £150 council tax discount, based on outdated property values, which misses out hundreds of thousands of the poorest families. And of course, I will in a moment, and of course, his £200 buy now, pay later loan scheme. A loan scheme, Madam Deputy Speaker, which he risibly claims isn't a loan, although it has to be paid back, and a scheme that doesn't even come in till October. Madam Deputy Speaker, what are families supposed to do in the meantime while they wait for his loan? It's almost like the Chancellor is so out of touch that he doesn't realise that 10 million families in our country have no savings at all. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
For giving way. The £150 that was be given out by Newcastle under Lyme Council was greatly received on the doorsteps, as was the money given out by Westminster Council. Perhaps he should speak to his council leaders in Barrow, Hyndburn, South Derbyshire, Bassett North, all councils that failed to get that £150 out of the people's bank accounts. If he's so concerned about the cost of living, why are his council leaders holding that money in their bank accounts instead of returning it to the people?
Anticipates the later part of my speech. That is the Conservative Party today. They'll blame anyone else and they'll never take responsibility. And Madam Deputy Speaker, he should have been supporting our measures, because in his constituency, 11,353 people would get our combination of a VAT cut and the Warm Homes discount of £600. And if he votes against us tonight, he'll have to explain to them why he is denying them the help they need. I give way to the honourable lady.
For giving way, he's making a powerful speech. I wonder if he shares my anger at news this week that the government has underspent its net zero budget by a staggering £250 million at exactly the same time when our constituents are struggling to keep their homes warm and to deal with accelerating fuel poverty.
I agree with the honourable lady. At every step of the way, they've had the chance to act and they haven't. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. The figures for Northern Ireland, very interesting. 241,000, 30% of people in poverty in Northern Ireland, 70% of all children in poverty, 14% of all pensioners in poverty, and 11% of all working age population in poverty. Those figures scare me. Do they scare you?
I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. I've been around politics for a long time, as this House knows, but I cannot remember, and nobody in this House can remember, the kind of emergency that we are facing at the moment. Now, his recent spring statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, was the most recent chance for the Chancellor to redeem himself, days before the April energy price rise came into effect. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was apparent to everyone across this House and in the country that what he had offered was woefully inadequate. People were literally pleading with him to do more on energy bills, but he just doubled down on his failure. 3 chances in the last 7 months, none of them equal to the emergency. And I will in a moment. And at every step of the way, the truth about this Chancellor is that he has been in denial, he has been slow to act, and he has been wholly out of touch in his response. I give way to the honourable lady.
We debate what more we can do, but will he accept that the measures we put forward in terms of the national living wage, in terms of the universal credit, and in terms of the national insurance threshold changes add up to more than what he is suggesting?
No, I don't accept that, and I can tell her there are 8,014 families in her constituency that would benefit from the changes that we are suggesting if she votes for them tonight. Now, let me tell her and the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is very important, what this failure means in reality. The basic level of universal credit this year for a single person over 25 is £334 a month. His measures this April are so feeble that someone on that benefit will be expected to find as much as £50 more a month or more to simply cover the increase in their energy bills. That's leaving aside the soaring costs of food and other goods. It's about 15% of their income. So what are they going to do? They won't be able to afford to pay their bills. They will get deeply into debt, and they will go without food. It's already happening to millions. I met someone in the CAB in my constituency on Friday in similar circumstances. Let me be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would have no idea how I would cope in these circumstances. Would any member of this House? Maybe the Chancellor can tell us what somebody in these circumstances is supposed to do. And, Mr. Speaker, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you can't answer that question, it should tell you something, that you are failing in your duty to the people of this country who most need your help. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, what makes him even more culpable is that there is something that could help staring him right in the face, where the case has become unanswerable, where the government has run out of excuses, where oil and gas producers are making billions, a windfall tax. Now, it's so hard to keep track of what the government's position is on this, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I've given up. But I think he said he's prepared to look at it. But honestly, the British people can't afford to wait for him and his dithering anymore, or his hopeless excuses. And I want to go through the hopeless excuses, because this is an important argument that this House and this country needs to have. What are their excuses for not doing a windfall tax? Right, first, they said in January that oil and gas companies were, and I quote, struggling, in the words of the Education Secretary, struggling. BP, the highest profits for a decade. Shell, its highest profits ever. The boss of Bernard Looney describing the price hike as a cash machine. And these people say the companies are struggling. Maybe we can do a show of hands. If anyone opposite still believes that the companies are struggling. Are they struggling? What's their next excuse? They argue a windfall tax would hurt investment. But it will, he says. Oh, he will, says it's from a sedentary position. Right, OK, here we go. But the problem is the companies themselves say this is nonsense. BP's CEO, who I take as more of an authority than the honourable gentleman, Bernard Looney, was asked 2 weeks ago which investments he wouldn't proceed with if a windfall tax was levied. And what was his answer? There are none we wouldn't do. Even BP don't buy the Tory arguments against a windfall tax on BP. And the final excuse, no, I'm going to make some progress. The final excuse, and I do want to come to this because this is important, and maybe I'm anticipating the Chancellor. The final excuse is it's somehow anti-business to levy a windfall tax. Let's dispose of this argument too. And I strongly recommend to honourable members who believe this to read an article which I have here, and I'm happy to put a copy in the Library of the House, and it's by Mr. Erwin Stelzer, long-time confidant of Rupert Murdoch. This is the first time I have quoted him in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker. In an article entitled, a few days ago, "Now is the time for a windfall profits tax," he wrote this: "People who believe in capitalism believe that private sector companies should be rewarded for taking risks, not be rewarded for happening to be around when some disruption drives up prices, producing windfalls." And that is the point. These profits are unearned, unexpected, and the British people are paying for this windfall. These companies are not profiting from decisions they have made, risks they have taken, wealth they have created, but from a global spike in prices to which Britain is badly exposed, exacerbated by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. What is the principle the government is defending here? What is their hill to die on? Is the principle they really wish to defend that oil and gas companies should pocket any profits, however bad the geopolitical instability, that however large the crisis, however gigantic the windfall, taxation must not change? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a proposition rejected by Margaret Thatcher, Geoffrey Howe, George Osborne, remember him, all of whom levied windfall taxes. And who else do we see supporting a windfall tax today? I have to say it's a pretty big tent, Madam Deputy Speaker. John Allen, the guy who runs Tesco. Sharon White, the woman who runs John Lewis. Lord Brown, the guy who used to run BP. And Lord Haig, the guy who used to run the Conservative Party. The usual lefty suspects. The truth is, they have run out of excuses. And amidst the chaos and confusion about what their position is, I think a massive U-turn is lumbering slowly over the hill. But I say this to the Chancellor: swallow your pride and get on with it. Because every day he delays is another day when the British people are denied the help they need. Millions of families having sleepless nights because the Chancellor won't act. What is he waiting for? He should come to the House, as proposed by my right honourable friend the Shadow Chancellor, with an emergency budget for a windfall tax, getting rid of VAT on energy bills, an increase in the Warm Homes discount to £400, an emergency plan to insulate 2 million homes this year, and a cut in business rates. And their position on the windfall tax, Madam Deputy Speaker, is part of I won't for a moment. And their position on the windfall tax is part of a wider problem with this Chancellor and this government. Just look at the political choices he is making. He leaves non-doms shielding their millions, while millions of families and pensioners face a cut in their incomes. He whacks up taxes on tenants and lets landlords off the hook. He makes young people at work pay more, but those getting money from capital gains pay not a penny extra. Wrong, unfair, unjust, out of touch. That's who he is. Now, of course, I won't give way. Now, of course, being this government, they always try and blame someone else. We heard it earlier on. In just the last few days alone, Madam Deputy Speaker, here is the roll call of people the party opposite are trying to frame. I have to say it's hard to keep track. The Bank of England, civil servants working from home, shamefully, the British people being unable to cook properly, apparently the cause of food banks. Yesterday, a ludicrous suggestion for one of these ministers, people not working enough hours. And the Chancellor of all people, is at it too. Who does he blame for the massive cut to benefits? He blames the IT system. The dude from Silicon Valley. Madam Deputy Speaker, who is he trying to kid? If he had got his act together early enough, of course he could have raised benefits properly. Indeed, the thing I don't get is this. He found it perfectly possible to cut universal credit by £20 in the middle of the year in September. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not a case of computer says no, it's a case of Chancellor says no. It's not the case of a computer system not being up to it, it's the Chancellor not being up to it. Mr. Speaker, the story of the last few months, crypto has crashed and so has the Chancellor. And how similar they are, the Chancellor and cryptocurrency, came out of nowhere. The value surged, looked like the future, but it's all turned out to be one giant Ponzi scheme. He's just been found out. He's been rumbled, and let's be honest, his colleagues all know it. He's out of touch with what is happening in the country. He's out of ideas when it comes to doing the right thing, and he's out of his depth when it comes to the challenges this country is facing. And the problem, of course, is that today's cost of living crisis doesn't stand alone. It comes on top of a decade of failure, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why families in our economy are so vulnerable. Growth over the last 12 years averaged just 1.4%, the worst of any government since the Second World War, the worst decade for living standards since the 1920s, according to the IFS. Indeed, wages would have been £7,000 higher on average than they are today if wage growth had matched the rate under the last Labour government. Taxes at the highest level since the 1950s. Public services struggling. Never have so many paid so much for so little. 12 years of Tory economics have failed. And what does he offer in the future? He offers more of the same. Anemic growth, just 1.7%. Squeezed wages as far as the eye can see. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the plan for growth we need. Tackling the cost of living crisis so people have more money in their pockets. An industrial strategy so we have good jobs in the industries of the future. That is what governments all around the world are doing. And we need a plan, Madam Deputy Speaker, to give people proper rights to boost wages at work to make our economy fair. Where is the employment bill promised in 2019 and still not here? They may mouth the words of being on the side of workers, but their actions tell the real story. I'm going to wind up. These are the... OK, I'll give way to him. OK.
I'm glad he mentioned jobs on the day that we saw unemployment fall to its lowest level, and actually the number of people out of work is now lower than the number of vacancies in the economy. But he's just made an extraordinary number of unfunded spending commitments at the dispatch box. And I just want to take him to the big difference between his side and the Chancellor. I remember the spring statement, and the Shadow Chancellor made a commitment to raise benefits early, and she said it cost no money. It actually cost £24,000 million across the spending period. No sense of how to pay for it. That's Labour. Start, finish and end.
It's good to see he's clambered back on the career bandwagon. I thought he was no longer a loyalist. The truth is, it's actually the Resolution Foundation that pointed that out, and I can give him the reference. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to wind up. These are the basics of a modern economy, but this government is failing on all of them. No cost of living plan, no growth plan, no plan for rights at work. They haven't learnt the mistakes of the last decade, and they are condemned to repeat them. The truth about this gracious speech is it does not remotely rise to the short or long-term challenges the British people face. But I end by saying this. This House can make a difference tonight. And I say to his MPs directly. We have all heard from our own constituencies what families are facing. This is an emergency for millions of people. A windfall tax could make a difference. Use this opportunity to tell the Chancellor to act. It is the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. The case is unanswerable. And if they do not, they will have to explain to their constituents why they refuse to support the help that could make a difference now. I urge members to vote for our amendment tonight to help tackle the social emergency our country is facing.